My wealthy parents disowned me for marrying a lowly salesman. 5 years later, they begged me to save my golden child sister from her disastrous choices. My parents provided my sister and me with a very comfortable life growing up. They spared no expense when it came to our education and overall upbringing, ensuring that we had everything we needed and more. This generous support is something for which I will always be deeply grateful. I witnessed many of my friends facing significant challenges at home while we were growing up, struggling to secure even the basic necessities. It was a stark contrast to my own experience, where such struggles were absent. Our household was one of abundance, where material needs were effortlessly met. Despite the wealth and comfort, I always tried to remain grounded. I was acutely aware of the privileges that our parents' hard work and success afforded us. This awareness fostered a sense of gratitude within me. I never viewed our financial status as a reason to feel superior to others. Instead, I saw it as a fortunate circumstance that came with the responsibility to remain humble and empathetic towards others. I tried to take care of my friends as much as I possibly could. For example, if one of my friends didn't have any lunch money for the day, I would offer them my lunch or give them some of my pocket money so that they could buy something from the cafeteria and eat what they preferred. It was important to me that my friends never felt left out or deprived. Similarly, if a friend liked a particular lipstick brand but couldn't afford it, I would try to save up my own money so I could buy it for them as a birthday gift. It brought me joy to see their faces light up when they received something that they wanted but couldn't have. These small gestures were my way of showing appreciation for my friends and trying to share the good fortune I had been blessed with. It was never about flaunting wealth, but about using it in a way that could make a positive difference in the lives of those I cared about. My sister Ruth, however, took a different path. She often let our family's wealth shape her interactions with others, developing a sense of superiority because of it. This difference in our perspectives created a noticeable divide in how we related to our peers and approached life. While I valued humility and gratitude, my sister seemed to embrace the advantages of our affluent upbringing in a way that often made her appear entitled. While Ruth and I did have the same set of parents and received the same material comforts, there was a significant difference in our experiences growing up. When I was born, my parents were still in the early stages of their business, working hard to establish themselves and onboard new clients. Those initial years were a time of struggle and perseverance, and I saw firsthand the effort and sacrifices they made to build a stable life for us. By the time Ruth was born, the business had flourished and our family was enjoying the fruits of my parents' labor. As a result, Ruth grew up in a different environment, one of financial security and abundance. She never witnessed the lean years or the hard work that went into creating the comfortable life we enjoyed. To her, it seemed as though our parents had always been successful and affluent. I guess this is also why we had such a different outlook towards life. When I would share stories about the modest house I grew up in and the challenges our parents faced in their business initially, Ruth would often react with disbelief. She would scrunch up her nose and dismiss my accounts as impossible, unable to reconcile the idea of our parents ever being anything less than well off. To her, the notion of our parents having a period of struggle was inconceivable, and she would ask me to not recount this to anyone in school, since she did not want to admit to anyone that our family ever struggled in any way. I always hoped that Ruth's naivety and sense of entitlement would fade as she grew older, expecting that maturity and life experiences would eventually make her more understanding and grounded. Unfortunately, that change never came. Despite the passing years, Ruth remained steadfast in her beliefs, always taking for granted the privileges we were afforded. As you can imagine, this disagreement in our thinking was what would cause multiple fights between us. For instance, if one of our friends wore clothes from a less expensive brand, Ruth wouldn't hesitate to point it out in a condescending manner. She might say something like, "Oh, I didn't know they still made those. I only wear designer labels," making our friend feel self-conscious and inferior. Similarly, during school events or parties, Ruth would go out of her way to flaunt her latest gadgets or expensive accessories. She would casually mention how our parents had just bought her the newest smartphone or designer handbag, ensuring everyone knew about her high-end possessions. This behavior of hers always made me uncomfortable, and if I ever asked her to be humble or to not say certain things in front of others, she would argue that she was just speaking the truth and that it wasn't her fault that people were poor at school. This would infuriate me, as I couldn't stand watching her belittle others and misuse the advantages we had. If you're wondering whether our parents supported Ruth's childish behavior towards others, I hate to admit it, but they did. My mother, in particular, was very much like Ruth in her attitude. Apparently, my maternal grandparents used to be quite wealthy until they lost a significant portion of their money due to bad investments. This financial setback forced them to give up their large, opulent house and move into a smaller one, a change my mother absolutely detested. She would often express her dissatisfaction to her parents, lamenting how she wished she had never been born to them or wishing that they could provide a better lifestyle. This was largely because my mother had many wealthy friends and felt inferior in comparison. It's important to note that despite the financial loss, my maternal grandparents were still able to afford a good life. It just wasn't the same lavish existence they once had. My mom has always had a lot of resentment towards her parents because of this. Hence, when Dad's business started going well and they shifted to a wealthy neighborhood, my mom finally felt at home. She loved the fact that people looked at us differently and we could now go for extravagant vacations without worrying about the money. Her sense of privilege and entitlement also rubbed off on Ruth, who's exactly like her. She always seemed to support Ruth's sense of superiority, perhaps because she saw in Ruth a reflection of her own past frustrations and desires. Unfortunately, this support only reinforced Ruth's behavior towards others, making it even more challenging for her to develop a grounded perspective on life and the privileges we enjoyed. When I first started dating, my parents had different pieces of advice to offer. My dad wanted me to find a good, hard-working, dependable guy to marry. He emphasized the importance of character, integrity, and reliability in a partner. My mom, on the other hand, had a very different perspective. She insisted that I should marry into a wealthy family so that I could enjoy a lavish lifestyle and she could gain access to wealthier friends within her social circle. I felt bad that she was essentially using me to climb an imaginary social ladder, valuing status and wealth over genuine connection and personal happiness. This pressure made my early dating experiences quite challenging. When I first started dating, my mom would often interfere and tell me how the guy wasn't good enough for me and kind of pressured me to break up with him. This resulted in a few fights, after which my dad had a talk with my mother, and she decided to keep her mouth shut about my dating life. However, I also quickly realized over the years that many men in the real world were more interested in my family's wealth than in who I was as a person. They saw me as a ticket to a comfortable and affluent life, rather than appreciating me for my personality, values, or aspirations. This realization was disheartening and made it difficult for me to find someone who was genuinely honest and kind, someone who could emotionally support me and be my pillar of strength. I often found myself questioning the motives of those who showed interest in me, making it hard to trust and form meaningful connections. This is why, when I first met Robert, I wasn't that excited initially. I assumed he, like every other guy before him, would light up at the mention of my family's wealth and try to get me to talk about my dad's assets. However, Robert turned out to be different. He didn't give 2 cents about what my dad had or the kind of lifestyle I grew up in. Instead, Robert asked me the important questions. He wanted to know how I felt growing up with my family. He was genuinely curious about whether my family looked after me, or if they were too busy with their own schedules. He even asked if I felt lonely and miserable growing up. These questions showed me that he was interested in me as a person, not as an extension of my family's wealth. Robert's focus on my feelings and experiences, rather than my family's financial status, was refreshing and comforting. It was the first time someone had taken the time to understand my personal history and emotions, rather than just my family's material wealth. This approach made me realize that Robert saw me for who I truly was, and it marked the beginning of a meaningful connection between us. Unlike me, Robert had a humble upbringing, yet he never made me feel like I was just a money bag to him. He would take me out on dates to small cafes and treat me like a queen. I loved how he was so confident in who he was and never felt inferior or put me down. Unlike many men I had encountered in the past, Robert's lack of a big ego and his genuine appreciation for life stood out to me. He wasn't trying to impress me with grand gestures or extravagant outings. Instead, he focused on creating meaningful experiences and showing me genuine care and affection. This authenticity made me feel valued and cherished in a way I hadn't felt before. Robert's ability to see and appreciate the simple joys in life without feeling the need to compete or prove himself created a sense of stability and comfort in our relationship. This is why, when I introduced Robert to my family, I was quite nervous, since I was serious about him and wanted to see if he could fit in with my family. I was particularly worried about how my mother and sister would react, given their tendency to put others down. During lunch, my dad engaged Robert in a conversation about his business and listened attentively as Robert talked about his job. Robert was quite frank about his humble upbringing and expressed gratitude for where he was now. My dad appreciated Robert's honesty and humility, but I could see the disdain in my mother's face. Throughout lunch, she was utterly disappointed in me, and after lunch refused to talk to me directly, fuming that I had been dating someone like Robert. My sister, much like my mother, kept making subtle comments and jokes about Robert's outfit, hairstyle, and upbringing. These remarks irritated me, and I repeatedly told her to stop. It was disheartening to see them judge Robert based on superficial aspects rather than his character and the way he treated me. Despite their negativity, Robert remained polite and composed, which only reinforced my feelings for him and highlighted the stark contrast between his genuine kindness and my family's superficial judgments. After lunch, my dad shared his thoughts with me privately. While he acknowledged that Robert seemed like a wonderful guy, he expressed concerns that Robert might not be able to provide me with the same lifestyle I was brought up with. My dad was worried about my future comfort and well-being, fearing that I might have to compromise on the material aspects of life I was accustomed to. I understood his concerns, but felt it was important to explain how Robert made me feel truly seen and heard. I told my dad that I was willing to compromise on lifestyle if necessary because Robert and I were compatible in many other, more meaningful ways. Robert's kindness, understanding, and the way he valued our relationship meant more to me than just maintaining a luxurious lifestyle to show off in front of others. My dad appreciated how hardworking Robert was and recognized the genuine connection we shared. It was a relief to have at least one parent start to see what I saw in Robert, giving me hope for a future where my family would accept and support our relationship. However, my mother and sister made their disapproval of Robert abundantly clear. They criticized everything about him and insisted that he wasn't a good fit for our family. My sister went so far as to stalk his entire family on social media, showing me pictures of their lifestyle and highlighting how terrible it was compared to ours. Just to give more context, Robert was doing quite well in his sales job when he met me and lived in a very good neighborhood in his own apartment. He had always been open and honest with me about his background and his family situation, so I was not surprised by any information that Ruth threw at me. I tried to explain to my sister that she had no right to put Robert's family down, since he had no way to choose which family he was born into. I emphasized that Robert had worked incredibly hard throughout his life to achieve his current status and deserved to be appreciated for his hard work. I told my sister that while I understood Robert didn't have the same kind of materialistic wealth we were used to, his heart was immense, and he was genuinely kind-hearted. Robert was the kind of person who would willingly give up his own plate of food if it meant I could eat. His selflessness and dedication to our relationship were qualities that I deeply valued. Despite the negative opinions from my mother and sister, I knew Robert's character, and the genuine love and respect he showed me were what mattered most. I also shared this perspective with my mom, since she kept voicing unnecessary concerns about my relationship with Robert. I emphasized to her that I would rather work hard and build a future with someone like Robert, who truly valued and appreciated me, than marry into a wealthier family where I might never be valued for who I am. Despite my attempts to explain my feelings, my mother and sister didn't respect my decision and continued to insist that I should break up with Robert as soon as possible and find a more eligible bachelor. Several times they tried to set me up with other, more privileged men, believing that a wealthier match would be more suitable for our family. At times, they went to great lengths to trick me into going on dates with other guys. They would call me to meet up for a movie or at the mall, only for them to not show up, and then would suddenly spring me with the news that they had set up a date for me. They would pressure me into going on dates with these men that they had supposedly arranged. If I ever tried to cancel my dates, they would tell me how it would reflect poorly on them and that people would talk about our family. This manipulation left me feeling uncomfortable and frustrated, as I had to awkwardly turn down these poor men during our dates and explain that I was already in a relationship with my partner, Robert. As you can imagine, these experiences led to more frequent arguments with my mother and Ruth. I tried to make them understand how their actions were crossing my boundaries and causing me distress, but they never seemed to grasp the extent of my frustration. Their lack of respect for my choices and feelings only deepened the conflict between us. This is why, when Robert finally proposed to me after 3 years of dating, I was already prepared for my mother's harsh reaction. She openly expressed her disappointment, accusing me of embarrassing the family by choosing to associate with someone who was beneath us. Her words felt like a blow to my happiness, as she seemed unable to see beyond her own materialistic concerns. Ruth, too, was upset. She refused to pick up my calls or offer any congratulations for my engagement, further adding to the tension between us. Her refusal to acknowledge this significant moment in my life was deeply hurtful, reflecting her ongoing disapproval. My dad, in contrast, took a more neutral stance. While he seemed genuinely happy for me, he also expressed some doubts. He urged me to consider a pre-nuptial agreement before marriage, citing various concerns about how Robert might potentially steal money from us. I was quite sad by my family's reaction to such a happy occasion in my life. It bothered me immensely how they were always so selfish, focusing on protecting themselves and their wealth, rather than on my feelings and happiness in my life. However, despite the mixed reactions from my family, I remained committed to my decision to marry Robert. When it came time to plan our wedding, Robert and I decided we wanted to handle the expenses ourselves. We were determined not to ask for any financial support from our parents. All I hoped for was that my family would be present at the wedding and celebrate this joyous occasion with us without any complaints. However, just a day before the wedding, my parents requested a one-on-one meeting with me. During this meeting, my mother took the lead in expressing her dissatisfaction, telling me that the wedding was a huge mistake. My mother kept saying how Robert just didn't match our lifestyle and how she felt ashamed of being associated with someone who was just a useless sales guy. She said her friends' daughters were marrying into wealthier families, while I was apparently downgrading myself by being associated with this man. My mother even commented about how this was why Ruth's always been her favorite child, since she understood and shared her perspective, which was extremely hurtful for me to hear. In the back of my head, I always knew my parents didn't love me as much as they loved Ruth, but she had never been so outright open about her feelings until that day. My dad also kept saying how worried he was that I was marrying without a prenup, and went on to threaten me that he would not ever give me any money in the future or leave me with any properties if I didn't get a prenup before getting married. He kept saying how he didn't work so hard for another man to steal it away from us. I tried to reassure my parents, explaining that Robert genuinely loved me and that while he wouldn't mind signing a prenup if I asked, doing so would be unfair to him. I knew Robert well enough to be confident that he would never take a penny from me, regardless of what happened. Despite my efforts to convey this, my parents' worries and judgments persisted, and they refused to back down. As a last resort, my mother issued an ultimatum, threatening that if I didn't heed their concerns, she and my dad would not attend the wedding. She also said that my dad would not walk me down the aisle. I was stunned by her threats and looked at my dad, hoping he might counter her stance. Instead, he nodded in agreement with my mom, telling me that I was walking on clouds and needed to understand their perspective as well. He expressed that he would prefer to cut me off now rather than risk being financially exploited by Robert later during my divorce. Their reactions were deeply hurtful and disheartening. I felt overwhelmed by the gravity of their threats and their refusal to support what was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my life. Their unwillingness to accept my choice and their focus on potential financial pitfalls rather than my happiness left me in tears. Thus, I reached a breaking point. I decided that I would rather live a life without my unsupportive parents than a life without Robert. My love for Robert and the life we were building together were far more important to me than their acceptance. I uninvited my parents from the wedding and walked out of their house, promising to never come back. Looking back, I'm glad I made that decision. Even 5 years later, Robert and I are happily married, and he has never made me feel that choosing him was a mistake. He continues to be the love of my life, and our relationship has only grown stronger since we got married. Robert has advanced in his career, securing a much higher-paying job, and we are now able to afford many things that we are grateful for. We both dedicate our weekends to various charity drives and donate money to underprivileged children whenever we can. These activities help keep us focused on what truly matters and bring a sense of purpose to our lives. In the past 5 years, my parents and I haven't spoken a word. The rift between us remained unhealed, and their continued disapproval created an insurmountable barrier. As for Ruth, our relationship was never strong to begin with, so it's not surprising that she has also chosen not to speak to me. Despite the lack of communication with my family, I have found solace and fulfillment in the life Robert and I have built together. This is why when my mother called me out of the blue yesterday, I was quite taken aback. Initially, I ignored her calls, unsure of what to make of them. Given the long period of silence and the strained nature of our relationship, I was reluctant to engage. However, a swirl of thoughts raced through my mind. Perhaps there was a medical emergency, or something had happened to my dad. So I decided to answer when she called me for the third time. The conversation began in an awkward silence. Neither of us knew quite how to bridge the gap that had grown over the years. My mother eventually broke the silence with small talk, asking if I was doing well. I didn't want to be outright rude, so I answered her question politely. But I also wanted to address the reason for her unexpected call. I asked her directly why she had reached out after all these years of estrangement. This was when my mother slowly admitted that she and Dad had been keeping tabs on me and Robert over the years. She revealed that they were pleased to see how well we were doing, despite their earlier disapproval. It seemed they had been watching from a distance and were satisfied with our progress. However, the real reason for her call became clear when she explained that she believed I was the only person she could turn to help out with the situation regarding my sister Ruth. According to my mother, Ruth was involved with a wealthy man who had serious issues, including a drinking problem and a gambling addiction that had led to a lot of debt. My parents had tried various approaches to break them up, but Ruth had refused to listen to them. She was determined to stay with this man because she believed he could provide her with the life she had always dreamed of. However, the situation had deteriorated further. The man Ruth was involved with had started to ask my dad for money to pay off his debts. Despite his reluctance, Dad had helped out with a few $1,000s just because he wanted to make Ruth happy. Yet, the man had kept pressing our parents for more money, and they had now reached their breaking point. My mother insisted that they needed me to step up as the oldest sibling and have a serious talk with Ruth about her rebellious actions for dating such a man. She argued that since Robert and I had managed to turn our lives around over the years, my sister needed to learn from my example. My mother urged that I was their last hope and told me that I needed to keep our differences aside and help my younger sister out in whatever way I could. My mother's revelation was startling. At this point, I realized my parents were looking to me not just for support, but for a resolution to Ruth's ongoing issues. And maybe my mother thought I could potentially help out by paying off the guy's debt. So I asked my mother to stop talking and reminded her that she needed to stop using terms like older sister and family when speaking to me. I pointed out that she, Dad, and Ruth had all refused to communicate with me for years. It felt disingenuous for her to suddenly invoke these familial roles when they had been so distant and unsupportive. I wanted her to first acknowledge the long-standing issues between us and the emotional distance that had been created before expecting me to step in and resolve their problems with Ruth. However, my mom refused to apologize and told me that she and Dad did what they thought was right at the time and that I needed to let the past go. If I refused to help out my parents after the way they treated me and Robert? Update 1. Wow, when I posted this, I had no idea that so many people would support my decision. I'm genuinely taken aback that I was not wrong to think of not helping out my parents, even though they seemed desperate. I do agree that I deserve to get a proper apology from them after all these years, and that they have no right to ask for my help just because they have no one else to turn to. Update 2. It turns out I received a call from Dad today, just 2 days after Mom reached out to me. He started by apologizing to me for everything, and told me how blinded he was to not see and appreciate Robert for who he was. Dad then explained the various problems he's been facing in his business since Ruth became involved with her boyfriend. Apparently, the man has a very bad reputation, and understandably, potential investors and clients are now hesitant to be associated with my dad due to this connection. Dad admitted that he had lost a significant amount of money trying to pay off Ruth's boyfriend's gambling debts, but the man just never learned his lesson. He expressed that given the severity of the situation, he and Mom believed I was their only remaining option. They hoped I could help Ruth see the consequences of her actions and persuade her to reconsider her relationship with someone who had already caused so much trouble. This is when I suggested to Dad that he needed to do exactly what he had done to me 5 years ago. I told him that since no one could force Ruth to see the error of her ways because she was a grown adult woman, he needed to stop supporting her lifestyle with her boyfriend and should cut her off, just as he had done with me. Dad remained quiet as I continued, reminding him that he had no hesitation in cutting me off, even though it turned out he was wrong about Robert. I told him that if he had been willing to do that to me, he should have no problem applying the same approach to Ruth, given her current situation. I made it clear that aside from this piece of advice, I owed nothing to them, and that their problems with Ruth were not my responsibility to solve. I have no idea if my dad will actually listen to me or not, but he didn't argue with me any further. Update 3, a quick update. After my phone call with Dad, my mom called me in a fit of anger. She was outraged, calling it distasteful for me to suggest that Dad cut off Ruth, and blamed me for the fact that Dad was even considering it. She yelled that I was supposed to talk sense into Ruth, not convince Dad to abandon her. I simply laughed and told her she needed to stop calling me and expecting me to help her precious daughter when she had no problem abandoning me during my wedding. I reminded her that I had only suggested an idea to Dad, and ultimately, it was his decision to make. I reiterated that their problems with Ruth were not my concern. Since that conversation, I have blocked both of my parents from my phone. The recent interactions have taken a toll on my mental health, and I no longer want to be involved with my family in any way. Honestly, I don't care what happens to Ruth. I hope this is a lesson for my parents for always having treated me differently. I'm quite happy with Robert currently and want to focus on the life we share.